Hello from me. Okay, so I'm back for another video. So a few of you, or a couple of you, or maybe one of you, I can't even remember now, mentioned how my videos look dark and gloomy. So I thought it would help by doing a recording when it's nice and sunny outside and I have very large windows in my house. It's not actually dark and gloomy in here. The windows go from basically the floor level to the ceiling level. They're very tall ceilings in here. And so when you see a dark video, it's because the living room has a chandelier and the chandelier is very high. I have not gotten a stepladder yet, and I'm very short. And also, I don't know if many of you know, but I was born with a birth defect. My birth defect is tibial torsion, so my tibia bone is twisted. And is twisted in good shape. And I used to be able to, like I played volleyball and I did cheering, and I actually used to walk 15 miles a day, believe it or not. But people with this type of torsion, done some research on it, and a lot of them end up in wheelchairs when they're older. It gets harder and harder, and I have found at the age of 49, even though I do the work of a medical assistant and I'm on my feet all day, I'm in pain all day long. So I say that to say I won't be the one getting up on the step ladder to change the lights in the chandelier. I do have a tall daughter, and she's 5'9", and she'll be getting when I get because the ceilings are tall, so even at 5'9", she can't reach it. And when I get a step ladder, she is going to change those bulbs for me, and then it might be light. So I have in here a lamp now in the evening. So yeah, that's the answer for why it's dark and gloomy. And when I read that comment, it kind of made me chuckle. You know, the early Christians probably they probably met in pretty dark and gloomy places, seeing as they were being hunted down. Okay, and John was on the Isle of Patmos, and he probably got some sun and stuff, but he probably was confined a little bit to probably some dark and gloomy places. Dark and gloomy does not equal evil. I love you guys, just like your responses of ad hominem attacks. They crack me up because there's no substance to them. But anyway, let's get on track. The reason for my video today is I had watched the Way documentary that Philia promotes, and so I had typed up, and I've said before that my responses to debate and my response to things is better typed up. I'm better that way. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and I am one that does better in word form. But I'm going to try to read some of my responses that I made to the Way, and hopefully that'll help. It's lengthy, so I'm not sure whether I want to read all of what I responded, but I'm going to read some, and we'll see where we go from here. So my first response, I was only 10 minutes at this point, way into reading it watching the Way, when I saw some logical fallacies immediately within 10 minutes. So I'm just going to read what I wrote. I said, I'm watching the Way, already finding logical fallacies 10 minutes into it. For instance, is there a reason that I should care what the Roman Catholics have written in their catechism about what they think of Protestant worshiping on Sunday? Contrary to very popular belief, Roman Catholic Church was not, people, an entity until late in the 3rd to early in the 4th century, and I would dare say beyond. Dr. James White says it was really more toward 1100 year mark when it really had a formation that was contrary to biblical teaching. You have a couple of things before that, but really you guys, most of you guys are way off on the historical timeline. You just really are. And furthermore, the Didache is a first century document and would have been written while some of the disciples were still alive, and it clearly speaks of the Lord's Day. And it speaks of the Lord's Day as separate to the Sabbath day. That was written in the first century. And then I had written, when did RCC become the authority that the Way has given them the historical authority in early church matters? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. Okay, Torah observers are totally against the Roman Catholic Church, but they will settle on what the Roman Catholic Church claims historically from before they were ever formed. It doesn't make any sense, but the modern day catechism was written in 1992, just so you know. And let me see. Then I wrote the Roman Catholic Church, who says that Peter was the first pope in Rome, when there is zero historical proof that Peter was ever in Rome, is what the Way has used as their authority about Sunday worship. Okay, that's what I wrote. I mean, like, you're using them as the authority here. And then I said I have to rewind because I have to look up every authority that they have used to see what their credentials are, where they were trained, and which agnostic New Testament critics they were trained under. This will be a long process because when I watch a documentary, I tend to look and see, well, who are they citing? Are they citing men who were taught loosely in largely agnostic? Because a lot of the theological seminaries, a lot of them in our country are pretty agnostic. Some are really good, but so the first priest that they interviewed on the Way is Reverend Gilbert Martinez. His bio online lists only this for credentials on the college level. He completed a Bachelor of Science degree in Conservation of Natural Resources from the University of California at Berkeley. Okay, ding, ding, ding. California at Berkeley. That ought to be saying something. Berkeley, I said, is a cesspool of humanism and atheism. Okay, so moving on. Although he would have received theological training within the parish he was affiliated with, that would not include training in Hebrew or Greek. Training for RCC is largely surrounding Catholic dogma, their catechisms, and church tradition that is riddled with historical errors. I find it quite interesting that they picked a Catholic priest also who is heavily into the ecumenical movement. Also note that this priest cannot represent God's truth in any tangible way, given that my research shows he hosted a pro-homosexual pilgrimage of mercy, did not deny its participants Holy Communion when they attended Mass at a large pro-LGBT event in October of 2016. This is very recent. The parish also hosted a speaker from the nation's leading homosexual lobby group, the Human Rights Campaign. He has also admitted to attending pride masses. This from his own words. So, like many documentaries I have seen in the past that attack the true church, the makers of this documentary, The Way, carefully pick and choose who they interview and make sure it's not someone who has enough biblical and historical education to refute the specific claims of the documentary makers and producers. This is what real polemics looks like, people. Bit by bit, piece by piece, providing a counter argument. Moving on. Sorry I'm having to read this, but it is what it is. I cannot comment on the congregant. I'm not sure how many minutes into the Way I was in when I said this, but they interviewed a congregant that they questioned who had nothing to say. You know, I've seen documentaries where in order to make their point seem more reliable, is to camera zoom on someone that has a blank expression, like I don't know how to answer it. Okay, very sneaky. So I said, conveniently placed into the documentary to try to show the listening audience that Christians have no answer. For all we know, she could have been pausing because of any reason not related to the question. But it gets included in the documentary to drive the audience into thinking that the only ones who know what they are talking about is Torah observers. I did not fall off the turnip truck yesterday. I know how that works with some documentaries. I've watched a lot of documentaries. When you see a documentary where the one interviewing asks a pointed question, and then, we all know how a video can be edited to where they ask a pointed question, and then the person who's being questioned goes like this, like they have nothing to say. Yeah, convenient. Okay, moving on. They interviewed Pastor Stephen Kim. He was the next one interviewed, and he was educated. His bio: he completed all his formal education in New York City. After finishing his first master's degree in New York City, he went on and received his Master of Divinity degree from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is located in Louisville, Kentucky. Currently, he is attempting to finish his doctorate at the same seminary. This is all my research, folks. Although he may or may not have been trained in polemics, my guess is he left the interview driven to more study. I will read more on him. He does think that aborted babies go to hell, so I'm not sure how sound his theology is. And so, yeah, so the person may have specifically gone to a reputable seminary and not have taken a specific course on polemics. And polemics, you can't just take one course on it. You've got to, if you're going to be a serious polemic, it's a lot of study. I have not done it on the educational level in a fine school, but I do know enough about it to know that it's polemics and apologetics is not a superficial surface type way of looking at things or study. It's very in depth. Okay, so, but anyway, moving on. I can't find much of a background on Jason Toe. I've seen him a lot on YouTube, but not enough to really say, that his background can be verified. I'm not finding it. If someone has a really good background pre-Torah observing, I would love to see it. I've seen enough dealing with other religions and cults that they make claims that this person was previously a pastor or a youth pastor, but you can never find anything to back that up. I would be interested in finding a pre-Torah Jason Toe. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but I would love more information on him if anybody has that. The next person they interviewed was internationally known Dr. Arthur Bailey, apostle and modern-day prophet, as an appointed teacher, preacher, author, and executive producer of House of Israel, a local television program. Arthur Bailey operates in the gifts, and I think that I did copy and paste this part right directly from his bio. If I remember right, this was 12 weeks ago when I wrote this. He operates in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, including prophecy, healing, miracles, and words of wisdom and knowledge, with an apostolic gift to activate others to flow in their respective gifting and anointing. Dr. Bailey has spoken as a lecturer in college, universities, churches, and conferences. As a former pastor in the Pentecostal Charismatic Missouri Synod, Lutheran, Christian Reformed Church of North America, and Independent Church apostle, Arthur Bailey is a bridge builder. He has presented as lecturer and keynote speakers in colleges, universities, and churches. Dr. Bailey is interdenominational in his approach and has preached in Baptist, Pentecostal, Charismatic, Reformed, Christian Reformed, Catholic, Lutheran, and Messianic congregations nationally, and charismatic and non-denominational ministries internationally. Arthur Bailey has established congregations and community organizations, has served on many local and national boards, and has received many awards and recognition for his work as a community organizer. So you've got at least a couple educated in the field. A lot of them, not so much, or very ecumenical or liberal. So the next one, Dr. Alfonso Monzo, BND, biblical naturopathic doctor, is the next interviewed. He says in the documentary that no one in the churches told him what missing the mark, hitting the mark was. I have known that since childhood, I write. Missing the mark of the righteousness of God, of course. Which is why we need Jesus and why he said we must exceed keeping the law to be righteous enough to enter heaven. Moving on. The first discussion is about the Sabbath. One man says he always accepted the 9 commandments but skipped over the 4th. Problem is, though, there were not 10 commandments. There were somewhere over 600. The Talmud says 613. If we are under the law, we are under all of it. Or is it that we are under a new covenant set of instructions for Christian living? I claim the latter, that we have instructions in the new covenant. And I will pause here to say that I was discussing on my comment section under one of my videos, and the claim was made that in First John, talking about lawlessness, is that they had to have been looking back at the Old Testament scriptures because the New Testament was not written yet. That is an error because First John was written somewhere around 90 AD. Paul died, I believe, in 64 AD. All of the instructions about Christian living that Paul wrote to the churches, that were sent to the churches, all of the writings of the New Testament were already written and were already being, instructions on how to conduct church and church discipline, and even the famed First Corinthians passages about head coverings. Those were all already written by the time First John was being written. Okay, just so we can make that clear. The words "thou shalt" appears 965 times in the Old Testament. The words "thou shalt not" appear 204 times in the Old Testament. So if we are under the Jewish law, we better be prepared for 965 shalts and 204 thou shalt nots if we think we are Israel. And do it perfectly, because James said that if you offend in one point, you are guilty of breaking all of them. Okay, I'm going, must be the part in the way here where Mr. Tao is, I think it must be Tao. Anyway, he asks, is it sin to not worship God on the day he commanded? See, we get this argument, sorry, I was reading to make sure I read that right. So we get this argument from the Muslims also, so I'm used to this. My answer has always been, is it a sin to worship God on Sunday, and is it a sin to deny worship on Saturday? Is it a sin to gather with other believers on Sunday? It can't be, because the disciples met together on the first day of the week. They called it the Lord's Day. Does God reject worship on Sunday? Is he sitting in heaven, closing his ears if you call out to him and sing to him on the first day of the week? Of course not. And I brought Muslims into this simply because that's one of the things I know and have known well for a few years because I debate with them. Muslims meet on Fridays for Allah. So is it a sin to pray to the real God on Friday, to meet with God's people that night? When is it a sin to worship God? This is the logical fallacy I'm talking about. No one is sinning by worshiping God every day, gathering with God's people on Sunday. Since when? It's not a sin. Those people who are worshiping God on Sunday are also worshiping God on Saturday and Friday night, people, because he lives and dwells within us. Therefore, we're worshiping him all the time in the way we live our lives and in our workplace and with our children and with our family and with our community. and times of private worship too. What makes you think that I'm not privately worshiping on Friday night and Saturday? Let me see here. I often, there was a meme that I posted in Philia Sisterhood. It's a quote by A.W. Tozer, and it is the day I got kicked off Philia, because this is just such a disturbing thing to post on a Christian forum, right? Sorry, I have to read the meme real closely. If you do not worship God 7 days a week, you do not worship Him on 1 day a week. There is no such thing known in heaven as Sunday worship unless it is accompanied by Monday worship, Tuesday worship, and so on. Makes sense. No, don't need to go any further with this. Yes, Jesus. Oh, well, I guess I did go further on this. Yes, Jesus did indeed resurrect on a Sunday. And if you want to argue that in the comment section, I'm all for it. It's written in history. I know all the arguments about, I've been doing this for years, about the literal 72 hours versus partial days and all that. But if you want to argue it, okay. So I said, yes, Jesus did indeed resurrect on a Sunday. Thus, yes, disciples met together on the first day of the week. What do Torah observers do? Ignore God and all his people on Sunday because of some irrational fear that the big mean God would not like it? This is beyond silliness, of course. Now, since I've written this, I do see that some Torah observers are like, yeah, I still meet on Sundays. And that's great because nothing should bar you from doing that. God owns all the days, 365 of them, or whatever calendar you use. I don't think that matters either, but God owns every day. They interviewed Dr. Andrew Neil, Pembroke Theological, Oxford. He has a good education, and he is correct. The early church, first century, met on the first day, and as born-again believers, the resurrection trumps the Sabbath law. And it does. Sorry. Which was given only to ancient Jews in their location. Excuse me. This is not one. There is not once that Gentiles were commanded to keep the Sabbath outside of Israel, and there was not once that anyone was told to keep the Sabbath if they were living in other countries. Not once will you find that command. I challenge you on that one. In Acts 15, Gentiles were absolutely not instructed to keep the Sabbath. I mean, they weren't told not to, but the letter that was written up did not address that. And I know the answer is from Torah observers. Well, he said to go into the synagogues, and there they would learn that stuff. Well, there's no proof that the synagogues kept teaching that. As a matter of fact, you start, once Christians are veering away from the Judaism that starts taking place at the time, when it's rabbinical Judaism, Christians are just veering away from meeting with those in the synagogues. They start veering away from that. So, and in fact, Paul makes it clear that they are not to be judged for the days we esteem. I am sure they will have a twisty explanation later in the documentary, which they did, which all Torah observers do. Twist, 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 like a pretzel. And yes, the other commands are indeed addressed under the new covenant. Sabbath, Christ is our Sabbath rest. So we rest in him. I quoted Colossians 2:16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or drink or in respect of any holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are shadows of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Torah observers will say, well, that's just saying that the Gentiles, the believers in Colossae Colossae, or however you say that, were not to be judged for keeping the Sabbath. But that doesn't make sense when you read verse 17, because it tells you it's a shadow of things to come. Do you keep that shadow? I don't think so. And the early church didn't think so pre-RCC, which I will go into later. And Exodus 31:16, wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. To require Gentiles to keep the Sabbath is an attempt to make Jews out of them. It was a sign between God and the children of Israel. Paul, by the way, does Lee, talking to you, refer to believing Gentiles as believing Gentiles, not Israel? And I can bring up that verse if you want to, but yes, he does refer to them as believing Gentiles. And Christians don't claim we change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. That's called the false narrative fallacy. Claiming something we do not claim and then arguing against it is a logical fallacy. We don't call Sunday the new Sabbath, okay? We call it the Lord's Day because that's when he resurrected. We call Christ our Sabbath rest, and we rest in him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, depending on what calendar you're on. They interviewed Dr. Michelle Murray, and I found it interesting that her particular interest under her bio is this. This is who they interviewed. Dr. Michelle Murray, her particular interest is magical female, women and magic in Jewish and Christian communities of late antiquity. There has been much research directed toward women and magic in the Middle Ages, I found from one of her bios. However, studies focusing on women and magic in the first few centuries of the Common Era tend to be rare. Dr. Murray's research concentrates on the important yet largely neglected area of women and magic in Jewish and Christian communities of late antiquity. She focuses on the region of Syria and Palestine and Western Asia Minor during the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, areas that were home to Jewish communities and early Christian churches. Her projects will explore literary evidence and archaeological relia, incantations, curse tablets, amulets, and inscriptions pertaining to magical practices in these geographical areas. The Magical Female Project studies 2 main issues: ideology about women and the practice of magic, and the actual practice of magic by women. I'm going to pause right now because I need to charge my laptop, and I will be right back.